This is the history of rock and roll by James Wakefield, which is me. Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Sister Rosetta Tharpe was born on March 20th, 1915, and died October 9th, 1973. She was most popular during the 1930s and 40s. Many people believe that Chuck Berry or Elvis Presley created rock and roll, but if you look further back, you can see that Sister Rosetta Tharpe really created the rock and roll sound. She was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017 and had hit songs like Rock Me and That's All. Her style of music mixed gospel with what we know as rock and roll, and she played that rock and roll on her guitar. Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was born on October 18th, 1926, and died March 18th, 2017. He was most popular during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. While many consider Elvis as the king of rock and roll, Chuck was considered the father of rock and roll. He was known for a style of guitar playing which combined country, blues, and R&B to form what we know now as rock and roll. Little Richard. Little Richard was born on December 5th, 1932, and is still alive. Church music influenced him as a child, and he said he was greatly influenced by none other than the Sister Rosetta Tharpe. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986, and some of his most famous songs include Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally. Some people influenced by Little Richard include Bob Dylan, Elton John, James Brown, and the Rolling Stones. Buddy Holly. Charles Hardin Holly, or more commonly known as Buddy Holly, was born on September 7th, 1936, and died February 3rd, 1959. He was only 22. The cause of his death was a plane crash. Buddy Holly was the one to influence not only John Lennon and Paul McCartney, but also the name The Beatles. His band was named The Crickets. Since his band was named the Crickets, John Lennon thought it would also be a good idea to name the band after a bug. The bug, though, was the Beatles, and he wanted to do some cool wordplay on it, and instead of doing Beetles, he did Beatles, so it's more like beat. When Buddy Holly died, it was considered the day the music died. Don McLean refers to this in his famous song, American Pie. Elvis Presley. Elvis was born on January 8, 1935, and died August 16, 1977. He started his rock and roll career in 1954. Now he is known as the King of Rock and Roll. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986, the same year Little Richard was. He was the one who brought rock and roll to younger audiences and brought a youthful feeling to the music. He was one of the greatest performers as well. Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan was born on May 24, 1941, and performed cover songs by Little Richard and Elvis at his high school. Bob Dylan was such a good songwriter, he won a Nobel Prize for Literature. He has 12 Grammy Awards and 27 nominations. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988. The Beatles. Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison. The Beatles formed in 1960 and have famous songs like Hey Jude and Yesterday. Just recently, there was a movie named after the song Yesterday. The Beatles have 7 Grammy wins and 23 nominations. Some bands that the Beatles have influenced are the Eagles, the Beach Boys, and Billy Joel. The 1970s. The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, David Bowie, Queen, Aerosmith, the Eagles, Elton John, AC/DC, Billy Joel, and many, many more. The 1970s was a time of total transformation in rock and roll. Bands and artists started using more electronic sounding instruments and experimenting with different sounds. Rock and roll from the 70s is more like the rock and roll we know today. Here's an article that does a great job explaining rock and roll in the 70s. The 1980s. Journey, Van Halen, Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses, and then pretty much everyone else from the 70s. In the 80s, there was a lot more disco, but sadly, there is also more sad stuff. John Lennon dies, Bob Marley dies, Led Zeppelin breaks up, Harry Chapin dies, and more people die. Look on the bright side, though. They elected Cleveland to be the home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Chart of the best rock and roll bands of all time. And I promise you this isn't biased. Okay, maybe a little bit. Here is my works cited page. There's nothing really here except works cited. Get this. And if you want to learn more about rock and roll, please visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. If you can't do that, Wikipedia should just be fine. The end.